This is the Sudan Civil War, a battle between allied warlords turned bitter enemies that is tearing apart this impoverished African nation. It is just the latest in a long line of internecine conflicts in a country that has seen just 10 years of peace in the 69 years since it became independent. In that time, there have been no fewer than 20 coups, 3 civil wars, a genocide, and the country has split in two. So, why is Sudan so war-torn? Where are we in the latest round of fighting, and will the country ever see peace? Let's find out. This is Sudan, in northeastern Africa. It is one of the largest, least developed, and most war-torn countries on the entire continent. Today, there are 2 separate nations, Sudan and South Sudan. But all of this was originally part of one enormous country. The capital, Khartoum, is here, where the Blue and White Nile rivers join before flowing into Egypt. This arid northern part of Sudan is primarily Arab Islamic, the single largest ethnic and religious group in the country who dominate its military and political institutions. The greener central and southern parts are home to Christians and a plethora of other ethnic and religious groups, over 300 of them by some estimates. For centuries, Sudan was ruled from the outside. The Egyptians, the Ottomans, and the British were all in control at one point. But in 1956, it won independence and was immediately plunged into chaos. Sudan's newly elected government was weak, divided, and struggling to get anything done amid a civil war that was already underway between North and South. Within 3 years, there were 3 coups, one of which overthrew the government and replaced it with a military strongman, establishing a pattern that we'll see repeat over and over. Despite the coup, the war continued for another 2 decades, only ending in 1972. The man who achieved peace was Jafar Nimeiri, a former colonel who ran a strict one-party socialist state. Incredibly, he managed to keep Sudan's many factions from fighting, surviving another 3 coups along the way until 1983, when he attempted to impose Sharia law. This caused the South's non-Muslim groups to revolt again, beginning another 20-year civil war. Nimeiri would not see the end of it. In 1985, a coup finally got him, ushering in another very brief period of democratic rule. But once again, the government proved too weak and divided to rule. And in 1989, well, I think you can guess what happened. This time, the coup leader was Omar al-Bashir, a brutal dictator who would rule for the next 3 decades. You might know al-Bashir as the man who unleashed a genocide in Darfur, this far western region of Sudan on the border with Chad. Darfur is majority Arab, like the rest of the north, but has significant black African populations as well. Tensions between these groups go way back, but were made worse because of climate change, which began in the 1960s and dried up a lot of the farming land. By 2003, with the Second Civil War still raging, these simmering tensions boiled over, and 2 African groups took up arms against the government. Bashir responded by arming and unleashing Arab militias known collectively as the Janjaweed on them, resulting in a genocide. The wider civil war ended in 2005 with a peace deal that guaranteed the South a referendum on independence, which easily passed and created the nation of South Sudan in 2011. But it didn't stop the fighting in Darfur, which continued until 2020. In those 16 years of conflict, an estimated 300,000 people were killed and 3 million displaced. It drew international condemnation and resulted in Bashir becoming the first national leader to be charged with genocide by the International Criminal Court. It was during this conflict that the 2 warlords we mentioned earlier met and became allies. Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, known as Hemedti, and Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. Hemedti, whose name means Little Muhammad, was born in Darfur, making him something of a yokel among Sudan's military and political elite. He rose to prominence fighting as part of the Janjaweed and then serving as its leader, with his fighters earning a reputation for shocking levels of brutality. In 2013, Hemedti rebranded the Janjaweed as the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, and used his connections in Khartoum to secure official ranks for himself and his men, along with a heap of government funding. He then used the RSF to grow his power. He secured allies in Libya and Yemen by sending his fighters there as mercenaries, and he also cut deals with Russia's feared Wagner group, particularly when it came to exploiting Sudan's gold mines which he used to line his own pockets. Hemedti's family now like to brag that they are one of the richest in Africa. Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, on the other hand, is a member of the Khartoum elite. Born in a village just north of the capital, he's a career military man. He served first in the border guards, then in a military college as an instructor, before ending up as a commander in Sudan's ground forces. It was this role that saw him deployed to Darfur, where he met and struck up an alliance with Hemedti. The two worked closely together to crush the Darfur rebels and helped coordinate overseas troop deployments to Yemen. Burhan was eventually recalled to Khartoum and promoted to Inspector General of the Sudanese Armed Forces, the SAF, while Hemedti stayed in Darfur. But the two men were reunited in 2019 when protests began to threaten Bashir's rule. Against the odds, Bashir had survived 5 coups and was still in control of Khartoum, but was about to face the uprising that would bring him down. What began as marches over an economic crisis quickly escalated into calls for a change in leadership, with Burhan and the SAF deployed to the streets. But as the situation deteriorated, Bashir summoned the RSF and Hemedti to help in what would prove to be a fatal mistake. Hemedti arrived in the capital, but instead of protecting Bashir, he teamed up with Burhan to overthrow him. At first, these old allies worked together to create a civilian government. But again, it proved weak and ineffective, so they carried out a coup against the very same government in 2021. This is where the roots of the current civil war lie, because the coup landed the two men in an uneasy power-sharing agreement. The goal was to return to civilian rule, with the RSF and SAF to combine forces. But, as ever in Sudan, civilian rule lost out. Deadlines lapsed, trust between Burhan and Hemedti broke down, and then a fresh round of fighting erupted in 2023. This is the biggest war you've never heard of, pitting two former allies against one another in a brutal struggle for power. It is the war that has wrecked the Sudanese economy and spelled disaster for its people, sparking the largest humanitarian crisis in the world today. This is the Sudan Civil War, and this is Battleboard. Here's Sudan as it is today. South Sudan is over here, Darfur is over here, and here is the capital of Khartoum. It is mid-April 2023 and the country has just erupted into war. Unlike the past where civil wars have pitched north against south, this conflict is pitting east against west. Operating out of their traditional power base in Darfur are Hemedti's RSF. Being a former militia, they are made up mostly of infantry, wielding rifles, machine guns and mortars. They also have a significant number of man-pads, shoulder-launched rockets designed to take down aircraft. What vehicles they do have are technicals, pickup trucks with heavy weapons welded to the back. These work best in fast raids in open countryside rather than pitched battles in large cities. The SAF, meanwhile, are concentrated in the east of the country, with their power base being Port Sudan. They have a lot more heavy equipment than the RSF, tanks, jets and artillery guns, but most of these systems are ancient. Some of their howitzers, like the M30, saw service in the Second World War. The bulk of their Soviet tanks date back to the 1940s, and their MiG-29 jets date to the 1980s. In terms of total strength, the RSF are believed to number somewhere around 100,000 men, though that figure needs to be taken with a pinch of salt. SAF numbers are even harder to pin down. IISS, a respected think tank, put them at just over 100,000. But some estimates are up to 300,000. As the war begins, RSF fighters quickly challenge the government for control in these areas of Darfur, centered around the regional capital of Nyala. They also seize control of parts of the neighboring Kordofan region around the city of El Obeid, stretching up to the western outskirts of the capital, Khartoum. Aside from Nyala and El Obeid, clashes also break out in Al Fashir, the capital of North Darfur, located here, and El Dain, the capital of East Darfur, located here. While the RSF are concentrated in just a few locations, the SAF are spread out across the entire country, all the way from El Dain to the Ethiopian border over here. They are also stationed along the Nile to the border in Egypt in the north. Because Sudan is so large, that means much of the army's fighting strength is unavailable for the battle that is about to erupt in the capital, Khartoum. This is Khartoum. a city which sits at the confluence of the Blue and White Nile, where they join to flow north as the Nile towards Egypt. This splits the city into three main parts. There's Khartoum proper down here, Khartoum North up here, and Omdurman, a closely connected suburb city over here in the west. The RSF are attacking the city from the west through Omdurman, while the SAF are attempting to hold positions in Khartoum proper and Khartoum North. On the very first day of the fighting, the RSF capture the headquarters of the state broadcaster located here in an important propaganda victory. They also claim to have crossed the river from Omdurman and seized this district, which includes the presidential palace, central bank and spy headquarters, and then the airport, which is located here. This early offensive into the heart of Khartoum city captures the military by surprise, and they begin to fall back. Using mortars and homemade rocket launchers, the RSF expand their control into Khartoum North. They also spread out to the east and south of the city, cutting off these two supply roads. Despite heavy fighting, the SAF cannot hold back the tide, and the advance continues for the next 2 months. By mid-June, the RSF are in almost total control of the capital. They have captured key highways to the west, north, east and south, and are in control of the city centre and much of North Khartoum, including a large industrial area here. The SAF have been pushed back to the suburbs of Omdurman and beyond the industrial zone in the north. Just 3 SAF strongholds remain within Khartoum. These are the headquarters of the armed forces here, the headquarters of the Armoured Corps here, and Karari University, a military training school here. Despite repeated attacks on these enclaves, the RSF are unable to take them, but it will be another year before the SAF can get in to relieve them. Until then, these troops will have to rely on supplies delivered by airdrop to survive. We're back in Sudan. The fighting we just saw taking place is here, and here's where we left the rest of the battle. Defeated in Khartoum, the SAF retreat to their stronghold in Port Sudan. This becomes the nation's de facto capital and nerve center for the regime. It is through here that the SAF will receive reinforcements and weapons from the outside, and it is from here that they will launch their counterattacks. For now though, they're on the back foot. Through the summer and autumn, the RSF push out from Khartoum and into the surrounding countryside. They're able to cut off SAF routes into the city from the west, east and south, but they're unable to dislodge them from the north, which will become crucial later. Elsewhere, they lock down control of the eastern Darfur region, and by December, they have taken control of Niala, El Dain, Zalingi, and El Janaya, 4 of the 5 regional capitals. Amid the fighting, the RSF are accused of targeting civilians in what amounts to a continuation of the genocide they began decades earlier. The only city they cannot capture is El Fasher in North Darfur, where a detachment of SAF troops are holed up under siege. They've also advanced south and east across Kordofan, bypassing towns and cities where their light infantry are less suited to fighting, but taking control of the surrounding countryside. Towards the end of 2023, the RSF make another breakthrough, this time to the south of Khartoum. Here they capture Wad Madani, capital of Gezira State, a strategically important logistics and transport hub that is the gateway to the southeast of the country. This sets the stage for another RSF offensive, southwards from Gezira into Sennar State. Over the next 6 months, Hemedti's men battle their way almost to the Ethiopia border, capturing the city of Sinjar, the capital of Sennar State, along the way. By the time autumn rolls around, they're in control of all of this territory. For a somewhat ragtag militia, this is impressive. The RSF has taken almost half the country, and while they failed to fully capture Khartoum, they control most of the city. But this is about as good as things will get. In the background, changes have been taking place that are about to turn the tide of the war in the SAF's favour. We're back in the wider region. What's been happening is that the SAF have been slowly recruiting regional allies to help against the RSF. Egypt has backed Burhan and is thought to have sent air support. Either they supplied fighter jets to Sudan or are flying bombing missions from their own territory. Eritrea, to the east, has agreed to host military training camps on its soil and take in refugees, while sending his own mercenaries back the other way. The leaders of Ethiopia, down here, are also thought to have sent Tigrayan mercenaries to stop the fighting spilling over their border. Further afield, the SAF has won the backing of Iran, which has started sending long-range strike drones in return for a base on the Red Sea, and Turkey, which has begun selling Bayraktar drones to the armed forces. Even further abroad, Russia, which began the war on the side of the RSF because of the Wagner Group, has now swapped sides. Moscow is worried about a growing alliance between the SAF and Ukraine, which have allowed special forces onto its territory to hunt down Wagner and wants to break it. The Kremlin also has an interest in a port on the Red Sea and is allied with Iran, so being on the same side of this war makes sense. This leaves the RSF isolated. They have just one ally, the UAE, which is thought to have sent plenty of weapons, but is not enough to match all of this. The drones and air support are particularly important. While the RSF have no air force, the SAF have so far been unable to make this advantage count because of limited numbers of jets. But with reinforcements now flowing in through the port of Sudan, this is going to start to swing the war in their favour. We're back in Sudan. Here's the capital, and here's where we left the rest of the battle. The SAF counterattack begins down here, in Sennar State, where an airstrike in July kills the lieutenant leading the RSF forces in this region. SAF troops then begin advancing west from Mabak and east from Sennar in order to close this pocket and cut off all of these forces from reinforcement. In October, the RSF suffers another setback when Abu Akla Khalil, the commander in Gezira State, right here, announces he is defecting to the SAF. This drives the RSF wild, whose remaining fighters begin massacring civilians as a crude form of revenge. The SAF then begin advancing from the south, recapturing all of this territory and advancing on the regional capital of Sinjar. By November, this pocket has been closed, and shortly afterwards, Sinjar falls, leaving all of these RSF troops cut off. Though it will take months, most of these troops will eventually surrender, leaving the armed forces back in control of the southeast of the country. The SAF then advanced to the north, and in January 2025, they retake Wad Madani, the key logistics hub to the south of Khartoum. This opens the way for an attack from the south on the capital, where the fighting has already been raging for several months. This is Khartoum, and this is where we left the battle. The RSF are in control of most of the city except these three strong points, which are being supplied by air, and the northern part of Omdurman. The pushback begins here, in Omdurman, where, during the first months of 2024, government troops backed by drones surged south to link up with the troops stranded in the military university here. Spy drones help the SAF to track RSF movements, pinpointing key locations for artillery strikes, which are guided to their targets by the drones. Once the Iranian and Turkish strike drones arrive, these carry out the attacks themselves. Then in September, these forces strike out across the Nile and secure a vital bridgehead on the other side, in the neighborhood where all of Sudan's important government buildings are located. Next comes Khartoum North, where troops again make use of their advantage in the air to retake this industrial zone along with several key bridges. By January 2025, they managed to push across the river and link up with soldiers who have been stranded at Military Central Command. At this point, those SAF troops that we saw advancing from Wad Madani in the south start arriving and push up both banks of the Blue Nile towards the city. They quickly capture territory on the northern shore, and while progress on the southern side is slower, it still puts considerable pressure on RSF forces in this part of the capital. Sensing that RSF control is slipping, troops hold up in the headquarters of the Armoured Corps also stage a breakout, recapturing all of this territory. The battle now turns decisively against the RSF. On March 12th, the SAF recaptures the headquarters of the national broadcaster, one of the first locations that the rebels had seized. Then, on March 21st, the presidential palace falls, followed in short order by the central bank, and then, on March 26th, Khartoum Airport. The RSF are forced to retreat westwards out of the capital as the SAF declare it has been completely retaken. We're back in Sudan, and here's how that battle has changed events on the ground. The eastern half of the country, including the capital, is now back under the control of Burhan and the armed forces. However, the RSF and Hemedti are still in control in the west, where SAF troops are besieged in El Fasher. This is more or less where the war stands today. Recapturing the capital has swung the tide of the war in the SAF's favour, but the RSF are a long way from being beaten. Estimates of casualties up to this point are extremely hard to come by. Officially, the military death toll is just 30,000. But that's because a near total absence of outside observers means nobody is really counting. The effect on the civilian population is much clearer. 13 million have been displaced, including 4 million who have fled into neighbouring countries, making this the world's largest humanitarian crisis. Almost half the population, around 23 million, don't have enough food, while around 600,000 in Al Fasher are thought to be at risk of famine. Fears are also growing for the SAF garrison in Al Fasher and the civilians trapped alongside them. If the RSF manage to storm the city, then yet more violence against civilians seems likely. Aid groups warn the situation in Sudan is now worse than ever before, which is saying something for a country whose history is so violent. So, where does the war go from here? And will this country ever find peace? Since it gained independence, Sudan has been beset by problems. In a country this large and diverse, answering a question like, why is there so much war, is always going to be complicated. But I'd like to pick out just 3 issues which seem to me to be at the root of its problems: Sudan's sheer size, its ethnic and religious divisions, and its lack of experience with self-rule. Governing a country this big would be difficult even for experienced statesmen backed by a strong economy and institutions, large bureaucracy, and advanced infrastructure. But Sudan has none of these things. It has few economic resources, so struggles to build the large bureaucracy that would be necessary to administer such a large state. Its infrastructure can be basic, meaning all these regions are poorly connected. That leads to factionalism. Couple that with a plethora of different groups whose allegiances tend more towards tribe or religion, and you've got a recipe for unrest. Its fledgling institutions lack the authority to enforce the rule of law, and in those conditions, might often becomes right. This produces the weak and ineffectual governments we've seen, hence why the country keeps falling back under the control of military strongmen. But equally, no army or dictator has proved powerful enough to keep such a large country together by conquest, at least not for any length of time. The South breaking away helped for a time, before the conflict became East versus West instead. Questions are now being asked about whether Sudan could split again along these battle lines. That seems unlikely right now, but so does a quick end to the fighting. Mediation efforts have gone nowhere. The SAF are winning, and Burhan has vowed to keep fighting until the RSF are wiped out. The one thing that seems certain is that Sudan is a long way from seeing the end of war. Thanks for watching. If you like this kind of content and want to see more in your feed, don't forget to hit like and subscribe, or click the buttons on screen to watch other episodes.